Hello everyone and welcome to another Challenge Family Triathlon webinar. Now today we're going to be looking at race week or the preparation that you should be doing in race week, and also kind of a more general preparing for a race, because preparing for a race takes a long time, so it's looking at the race week but also kind of more of a preparation towards an event. Now, this country has had some very positive news suggesting that we will be going, kind of more facilities are available, and that we're going to be able to it looks like we're going to be able to start going back to our normal routine of training, and then hopefully back into racing. So, this webinar kind of comes now to kind of say, well, not a lot of people have been doing, well, no one's really been racing. So some of these points might just refresh the memory of some things that you should be thinking about preparing for a race. And it seems like a good time to kind of talk about these things. Now, one of the big things about race week and a few months leading into the race is knowing the course. Now, when you go to an event or about a month away from the event, a kind of a course picture like this is Challenge Almere, will be released, and it's very important that you kind of break that down both leading into the event and also at the event. If for whatever reason you want to know really early in advance, it's quite easy just to go back to say 2019 and look at the course map. So understanding the course is very, very important. Now, in the race week, it's ideal to ride or run some of the parts of the course. Usually the swimming course, you can kind of see the layout of it if you can't enter the water, but there's usually kind of specific set swim recce times, but if you can't make those times, then you can kind of just go and see the area. But it becomes a lot more important with the running and the riding. Now, I'm using Challenge Almere because it's a full distance triathlon, and kind of the longer the event is, the more difficult it is to kind of get familiar with the course. So I thought go for the full course event, and you can kind of break it down towards the smaller distance events. Now, for a full course event, especially one like Almere where the lap is 90 kilometers, there's no way really, or there's no way that you're going to be wanting to ride that kind of 2 or 3 days out from the event. Now, the best thing that you can do is find someone that has a car and find someone that wants to drive the course. So at Almere, I was lucky enough that we drove to the event, so I drove the whole course before 3 days out before I actually did it, and that's a really good way of learning the full course. Now, you've seen that there's a couple of GPS things that have popped up. It's not of that course, but it was just a nice visual representation. But whenever you go to the challenge events, they always release a Garmin GPS profile and also one on Strava, so you can put that onto whatever bike computer that you have. So for full distance events, if there's a reason that you can't do the full course, then you will have this GPS that you can follow, which is really, really useful. And it's the reason that I went for a slightly more expensive bike computer than a cheaper one, so that when I go to these long distance events, I don't have to rely on not being able to ride the course and only being able to rely on kind of what I've seen from a bird's eye view, which is an interesting thing, or is a point that you should maybe consider when you look at buying a bike computer. Now, a brilliant thing with these GPS profiles is you can also work out from a data point of view how the race is going to be. So for Challenge Almere, for example, quite a flat course, so setting long, consistent efforts on the bike, on the turbo trainer, was very useful for me. Doing a bit of work in erg mode was very, very useful. Now, when the course, if you look at a course profile like Challenge Mallorca, you'll see that there's a lot more hills, it's a little bit more undulating. So when I was training for that event, I didn't sit in erg mode and I didn't sit at a consistent power, just holding power. What I did was a lot of my sessions at half Ironman pace were using apps or using settings on the trainer that made the turbo add resistance, either going up kind of like a simulation hill, on going down it, or an undulating course on whatever app you want to use, or even if it was just getting or just pressing a couple of percent up on the hill setting and then taking it off just randomly when I was doing these efforts, to get used to that kind of, you're kind of going out slightly over the watts and slightly under the watts of what you'd hold for the whole thing, because of slight inclines, slight areas that you just need to power over. So it was about being able to hold a consistent power, but also being able to take on those slight peaks and troughs of power. So that's a very interesting thing, that if you look at the GPS or look at the course, you can train according to that course. So this is how I like to do course familiarization. So as you can see, I've got the Challenge Almere course on the side, and then I've got my drawing. And obviously you can tell that, because I'm such a fantastic artist, you can tell that, you know, there's no difference at all between them. But what I did for Challenge Almere was I looked at the time that I wanted to do the bike leg in. I worked out what the average speed would be to hit that time, and then I used that average speed in a time distance speed equation to work out how long it would take me to get to each aid station. So, you know, I worked out that to the first aid station it was so many K, using just like a GPS tracker or calculator, and then I used that speed to work out how long it would take me in time. And this is very important, because if you've got a nutrition plan, you can use that time to work out how much fuel you're going to take up, how many gels that you're going to take, and that means that when you get to the aid station, you can work out, well, I've only got 1 litre of water on my bike and I've drunk 500 mils. Well, does this mean that I need to take on another bottle here and carry a full litre of water to the next station, or can I get to the next aid station with just 500 millilitres? And it's minimal gains, but it also makes it very clear to you what you need to take up in aid stations. And the biggest time lost a lot of the time is going through aid stations, just taking on loads of things, like taking on bottles, taking on gels. Work out what you need at each aid station to replenish the stores that you've already got. So in my case, I knew to the first aid station that I was going to take on 68 millilitres of isotonic drink, and I was going to take on 77 mils of water. So then I knew the deficit that I was going to have at that point, and then from that deficit I could work through the aid stations of when I then next needed to take on bottles and next needed to take on isotonic drinks, and when I would need to take on an isotonic drink versus when I need to take on a water. So it makes it very clear that I need this at this aid station, and that's all I need to pick up. And you don't need to be there forever taking on things. And it makes it very easy to also, like, maybe if an aid station is really crowded with lots of people, rather than just slowing down, is like, well, can I actually make it to the next aid station with what I've got, so that I don't have to wait that extra 30 seconds trying to kind of weave in and out of people, or even unclipping to pick up gels. It's that just being very clear on what you're needing at certain points of the course and what the course requires from you. Nutrition. What can and can't you eat? Every person is different. Some people can eat really spicy food, some people can't eat any spicy food. So the person that can eat spicy food, it has a much larger pool of food that they can eat, which probably wouldn't upset them before a race or in the week of a race. Some people have very, very small ranges of food. So it's about working out what you can't eat, what you can eat, and then just using that information for the best that you can do. Why are you eating what you're eating? Now, whenever you're training, whenever you're racing, you should always be questioning why you're doing something and how it's helping you. Now, what I would say a good way to approach this is, I'm having pasta the night of the race. Well, why aren't you having rice, or why aren't you having potato, or what's the benefits of eating potato versus eating rice versus eating pasta? How much protein do I need? How much fibre do I need? Do I need any fibre? Can I have this dairy product so many hours before the event? Now, these are all questions that a nutritionist can help you with, but I think it's also important to understand that there's a lot of information that you can find out in the world, so you don't necessarily have to rely on someone to tell you. You can go out and learn yourself. So that's what I've done. I've had outside assistance from various development pathways, but it's also about finding these things out for yourself. I mean, there's, I'm doing this webinar now. There's plenty of webinars that other people do that you can just look at and learn that way. Restrictive diets. Now, some people have really restrictive diets, and that's something that you can't avoid, and it's really annoying. And for people that have restrictive diets, I would say that the best thing that you can do is take as much food or take all the food that you'd eat in the race week with you. Now, if you're going through airports and you're going to different areas, just make sure that abides by the rules of taking it, and make sure that you always are very open with what you're traveling with, because some countries can be very tight on food, and especially kind of fresh fruit and vegetables, but take stuff with you that you need. Now, if you're restricting diet by choice, this can cause quite a few problems. Now, the biggest one that I know that creates issues is when people choose to reduce their gluten intake. Now, in most people, if you have too much gluten, it can make you feel very, very bloated, and also just make you feel a bit rubbish around in your stomach. So reducing your gluten intake can be a really good thing for rice and other sources of carbs. So one of the things that I did a few years ago was reduce my gluten, but when you travel, you notice very quickly that actually finding gluten-free products can be quite a hassle. And the easiest kind of forms of basic carbs when you travel are bread and pasta. So if you've been restricting your gluten and then you take on those foods because that's the only option that you have, then you will then have some complications with the stomach. So what I try and do is if I'm restricting certain foods, I'll always keep them in slightly just in case. So with gluten, I'll always make sure that I have a bit of toast with peanut butter every now and again, just to make sure that I can tolerate gluten. And also as well, like things like spicy foods. Now, spicy foods in general are to be avoided because they, upset the stomach. But if you can't take on any spicy food, you leave yourself very susceptible that if you go to, say, an Italian restaurant, and it's got a little bit of heat in the pasta sauce, someone that can take on a lot spicier food versus someone that never touches spicy food, they will have a lot more problems with it and be a lot more restrictive in what they can eat than the person that has a little bit every now and again and is kind of just ticking over. So if you're going to restrict your diet, brilliant, but just be aware that the more that you restrict it, the harder it can be when you travel away from your training centre or go to a different country. But with all of this, check with a nutritionist, check with someone that's an expert in the area, because any sort of restrictive diet can be quite, or reducing a certain part of your diet can be, you need to know why you're doing it, and you need to have someone that knows what they're doing with you. Timing rules. Now, it's very important to know what you can eat in relation to your event. So for me, for example, the last big meal that I can have is 4 hours from an event. So I'll give you an example. So my protocol is probably like rice and chicken, 4 hours out from an event. 2 hours out from the event, I can have a small bowl of oatmeal or a small bit of rice. And then an hour out from the event, I will have some gels or some energy products. And I'll probably be sipping on some sort of isotonic drink throughout. But last big meal, 4 hours before, a smaller meal, 2 hours before, an hour before, or 45 minutes, depending on what gel company you have, 30 minutes it might be. That's I know that, and that's the protocol that I use. A lot of people, especially me when I was starting out, especially with running, I would find that when I would run, knowing the time that it takes for your food to digest and then want to come out the system is also very important. So what I would do often when I was younger is I would eat a meal the night before, and then when I would run, 10 minutes into a race, I'd realise that actually this food is ready to leave the body. And this is down to a lot of things, but a lot of the time is it's prioritisation of blood and just trying to get rid of stuff that it doesn't need. So a good rule is 12 hours. If you eat a big meal, it'll be 12 hours after that meal that your body will usually want to get it out of its system. So if you've got an early morning start, say 6 o'clock, you want to eat your dinner at 6 o'clock the night before, so that it has that 12 hours that before your race you can then get everything out of the system that you don't need. And that's a really good way of just ensuring that within that first section you won't feel like you need to be on the toilet a lot. So that's a good rule to use, 12 hours, and then that will usually take how long it takes to remove the system. But you can time it in training. You can work out when you can eat, and then the next day when your body does need to relieve itself. So that's something that can be looked at, but that's a good rule for me. Practicing your training. So if you want to work out when the body wants to relieve itself, then eat, time it, and then see when you do, and then you can use that to be a model. And also the timing rules of when can I eat before a run so I don't get a stitch, or when can I eat before a run that I don't have a stitch but I also feel really good, because you don't want to then not eat going into it, or really restrict it going into it, because then you have the other side, which is just as much of an issue. Night of the race, this changes a lot, because the night of the race is really, really important of the meal. So usually in training and leading up to it, brown rice, brown pasta, brown bread, they're better sources of carbs. Now, the night of the race, it's better. It's often better to have the white rices and the white pastas, and that's because in the brown rice, even though it's a better source of carbs, it also has a little bit more fibre and things that can upset the stomach on race day. So if you go for the more processed white rices and white pastas, a lot of the time you can, it's better for you, even though it's a slightly worse carb source, it's less likely to upset the stomach. So typically I'll have brown rice all the way, and then the night of the race I will have white rice, and that's just a way of ensuring that it sits a bit better in the stomach. And especially if I'm going to have it on race day, I will have white rice over brown rice. So that's a change that I have. And also on most days I'll have porridge, but on a race I will have oatmeal instead. So I will just replace the milk with water, because if I have milk for intense activities, it doesn't sit well in the stomach. So I'm better off having the oats with some water than having that milk source. This is one of the things that I say to people that are starting to travel abroad is the gas stop challenge. And this is just basically like a small convenience store. Imagine that you've got 4 days and all you can eat is out of a small convenience store or a shop that's on the side of a gas station or a petrol station. That's sometimes how little access to food that you can have at events. And it's also working out, okay, in my hotel, I have no cooking equipment, and I don't want to eat what the hotel's cooking, or they don't have food service, or I don't have a lot of money to spend on food. Working out how the food that you can have, and then also working out how you can cook it. So I'll give you an example. When I went to Melilla for an ETU Cup race, we got to the hotel and I had to buy a kettle so that I could then cook my porridge pots, and so that I could cook my rice. And then it's about sources of protein. I got tinned tuna, I got tinned fruits and veg, I got tinned this. So it's very important that if you're going to go away, if you know how to cook things and to make decent food off of almost no cooking equipment. So that's a challenge that you could try at home, trying almost like, if you can only access pot noodles and things like that, how you would then cook them. And if you've only got a kettle to be able to cook things, if I've got Tupperware, how do I warm up my rice properly? How do I do things like that? So, that's a challenge that I think sometimes can help you learn like what you can race off, and what, if you've got very restricted things, how you can use them to your advantage. Planning is a very, very important part of all race day preparation. Note down key times. It's simple as that. Note down key times when things are happening. Note when you'll need to leave or when you'll need to start something. So it's just got an example down below. This is not necessarily for, it is for a race, but I've got just in training in general. I will note down when I need to do something, when I need to buy, and it kind of just keeps you on track. Given a margin of error, so if you think I'm going to go through register and transition, it's going to take me, I need to be there at 1 o'clock and it's going to take me 15 minutes. Sometimes you can get to transition and there can be no one. And sometimes you can get there and there can be a really long line. And that 15 minutes quickly becomes half an hour. So just leave a margin of error so that if you need it, you need it. If not, you don't need it, but you're all prepared. There's also things like just checklists and locations of where you need to be. And that really helps just keep everything on track on race day and race week. I like to work back from the event. So what I will do is I will have my event, and then for nutrition, for example, like I said, I can eat a meal 2 hours before. So the event's at 2 o'clock. I'm going to then eat my rice at 12 o'clock, and then at 10 o'clock I will have my last kind of big meal, and then that's then is straight. I don't go, oh, I'm hungry now, I should eat now. Oh, it's just, that's when I'm eating, and I'm eating. So that's the way that I work out. So on to sleep. Now, sleep is a real science, and it should be taken as seriously as your training. Now, training without recovery and training without sleep is almost pointless, because that's where you get all of your benefits. So the basic concept of training is that you damage the body and it rebuilds stronger. And the only way that it can rebuild stronger is if you have sufficient rest. So if you keep damaging the body, you just won't get better. So sleep is very important, and it could be argued it's more important than the training itself. Now, what is the biggest impact to sleep before a race? I would argue it's our telephones. Now, being at events, it's very tempting to be on your phone. You've probably met up with people that you haven't seen in a while. Everyone's posting stuff about being at a race, feeling really good, feeling whatever. They've been to registration, they're loving the course, they're feeling strong. It just doesn't help you, and the light off the screen alone tricks the mind into still thinking it's daytime, so the hormone release that you should get before you sleep is affected, so it can disrupt your sleep. Dealing with time zones. Now, for some people, what they try and do is they try and mirror the time zone that they're going to race in the country that they're already in. Now, this doesn't necessarily work for most people. I mean, if you're anything like me, you know, we all have work commitments, we all have times where we need to be places to live in the countries that you live in. But if you can try and mirror your sleeping pattern with the time zone that you're going to race in, you know, that's going to help you. So, you know, if you're going to a country where there's a 2-hour difference, then go to bed 2 hours early and wake up 2 hours earlier. Just kind of shift it to the country that you're going to. Now, if you're going to some extreme versions, like, you know, 9-10 hour difference, then that can be more challenging. But you can always try and shift your sleeping patterns a little bit to match the time zones that you're going to be traveling to. Things that will help you with sleep. Now, what I like to do when I go to sleep is I like to, what I've been trying recently is 2 hours before I go to bed, I won't look at a screen. So what I will do is I'll usually put on a podcast for an hour where I'm stretching. And one of the podcasts that I like to listen to at the moment is Coffee with Belinda, where she talks to a lot of professional athletes and get their kind of insights on certain areas. And it's just a good, fun podcast to listen to. So there's even one with me on there if you want to learn a little bit more about me. So they're brilliant podcasts to go listen to, so go check that out. But what I'll do is I'll do an hour of stretching while listening to the podcast, and then I will then try reading a book for half an hour to an hour, and then hopefully by that point my normal hormones will set in. I'll get that, oh, I feel a bit tired now, and then I'll go to bed. So there's some things that can help you fall asleep if you've been struggling. The best thing that you can do on race week and the few days before the race is get your sleep in early. Now, one of the things that my old running coach used to say is the night of the race is never important, it's always the night before. And it's a term that can be deemed kind of banking your sleep or getting your sleep in early. If you can nap in the day, then you've already got some sleep in your system. So if you miss an hour or half an hour of your sleep when you of the race night, it's not going to impact you as much as if you didn't have it. Now, the best thing you can do is try and get in sleep earlier in the week. So, a few days out, if you can try and get the sleep in the night before and the night before that, if you just build up a good sleep portfolio, then by the time it comes to race night, where it's the hardest night to sleep because of the nerves, the adrenaline, it doesn't really matter too much. It won't have as much of an effect as if you hadn't have napped earlier in the week or in the day. Now, it's better to try and stay at a 30-minute nap or a 90-minute nap, just from the way that our sleep cycles are. So that's also something to have in mind. Sometimes a 30-minute nap can be better than a 45-minute nap or an hour's nap. So that's just something that can also help optimize if you are going to nap. You can optimize it that way. Sleeping patterns in training, again, practice the sleep patterns in training. Practice these methods to go to sleep earlier, see what works for you, and then apply them to the race. Everything that we do in training is all about preparing ourselves to be consistent on race day. Consistent training builds a consistent body, consistent sleep builds a consistent, recovery pattern. And if you can get into a program where, like myself, I'll stretch and then I'll read and then I'll sleep, then it's a lot easier that you have a process in order to be able to sleep, rather than just saying, right, I'm going to sleep now, and then realise that you can't. The last thing to talk about is tapering. Now, this slide's not going to go into too much detail, and again, it's something that we could go into further detail, but understanding with training, when you train, you damage your body. Your body goes, I don't like being damaged that way, and then it rebuilds stronger. So you get lots of micro tears in the muscle. There's also other complex things that go on, but if we just take a muscle tear, micro tears, for example, your muscles have these little tears in them because they've been used, and in your recovery they rebuild, but they don't only just rebuild to where they were or repair, they rebuild stronger, and that's why you see muscles grow and things like this. It's the repairing of the muscles to make them bigger and stronger. So tapering kind of tries to enhance this protocol where you've done a nice training block, you then recover, and then because your body wants to rebuild stronger, you get better than what you were before you started the training. In tapering, you want to reduce your volume, and you also want to reduce your intensity, but you never want to remove it fully. Keeping intensity allows the neuro pathways to keep firing. It also helps the muscle fibers, just keep firing, keep ticking over. So it should be removed, but it should never be removed fully. And sort of things like this are doing pickups, or doing like a 400-meter rep at race pace, or doing like a few minutes at race pace, and lots of rest, but keeping that intensity, keeping the body moving over. Otherwise, sometimes if you rest that week and then you come back to racing at high intensity, your body kind of goes, oh no, what's happening? So it's just about reducing the load, but keeping elements of that load to keep the body prepared. There are many methods. Some people do 2-week tapers, some people do 1-week tapers, some people do very, very long tapers. And again, this can be something that we discuss in a future webinar, but just know that there are many methods, and that's something that you can look at, and don't just stick to one method, try lots of things. And if you're unsure about which method works for you, what I'd recommend is when racing starts up, so as triathletes, I believe it's good practice to go to swimming events, to go to cycling events, to go to running events. Before those events, try these different tapering patterns. If you're going to do a 5k run, and realistically the only thing that's really going to matter to you is getting a PB, then it doesn't really matter then if you try something, because if it doesn't go too well, there's not a lot of risk involved. It's not the A race, it's just a preparation race. So practice these things in your training leading up into kind of these smaller races, or kind of B, some people class them as B races or C races or whatever, but just kind of practice them in smaller events that mirror a race, so that then when you come to your big one, you know what to do. And the thing with tapering is it's all about just keeping it simple. Don't do anything that you haven't done before. Don't lift really heavy weights if you haven't lifted weights. Don't use equipment that you haven't used before. Just keep everything simple. It should basically mirror what you've already been doing, but just to a lesser degree. It should just be nice and easy, and you should just feel like you're flying through the process. You shouldn't even need to think about it. If anything, it's just quite relaxing, and it helps with the nerves. If you've enjoyed this webinar, please give the video a like, and From everyone at Challenge, we hope you have a lovely day. Thank you for listening. Bye.